I was this close to getting a 5-star January again, if it wasn't for this one book. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Melanie and I hope you enjoyed my intro in its new normal spot. I am late to this, but I am finally doing my January wrap up. It's been a crazy month. January was pretty much awful in America. I think everyone can agree with me, especially LA, because obviously we had the fires, and then you know who got inaugurated. So let's not talk about the bad stuff. Let's talk about the good stuff. And there's one slightly bad thing in terms of reading, but not as bad as what's going on in the country. So on that note, what did I end up reading in January? I was actually pretty good at sticking to my TBR. I did all of the books except for one, and you'll have to figure out the one, but I kind of have plans to read that one at another time, so I have been putting it off for a long time. But it was an interesting and fun month, and I had some really great reads. And so I did almost get a 5-star January, which is what I was trying to do. There was one book that I just could not get into, and so I ended up DNFing it, and we'll find out what that one is at the end, I guess. And so I will start off with the first book that I finished. And this one, oh, I have a lot to say about it, but I also don't have a lot to say about it. But I finally read In the Miso Soup by Ryu Murakami. This one I have been wanting to read. I heard it reads like an A24 movie, kind of. It's horror, thriller, about a young Japanese guy who takes people on tours in the Japanese, basically red light district, and takes them wherever they want to in their like sleazy Tokyo nightlife. And so one of his clients ends up being an American who is kind of odd. He's a weird one, and our main character can't really wrap his head around him, and it starts out very creepy. It's split up into 3 chapters. A murder just happened in the area, of an awful murder of a girl, and so it's just a weird vibe, and he's kind of struggling with his life, figuring out what he wants to do. Same with his girlfriend. And so he takes this guy out for a few nights in Tokyo, and things just start to get weirder and weirder and more creepy. And so the first chapter or part of this book, there's only 3. We get the initial reaction, their first night out. We get a weird vibe from him. The American's name is Frank. He is odd. He is a little off, doesn't feel right. So Kenji, who is our tour guide, keeps going, thinks nothing of it. Americans are weird. And so still skeptical of this guy, but, keeps going. And then we hit part 2, where it's one of the most disturbing things I've ever read. And so that way it was like hard for me to give this a 5-star, which I did. But I think that was literally one of the most disturbing scenes I've ever read. And that says a lot, because I read a lot of disturbing scenes. But this one I had to look away for moments, and I was like, it was so uncomfortable and so awful. And so I don't know what it says about me that I still gave this book 5 stars, but I think it's because the third part, we get like a lot of really, really good character work. I think that's what made that part worth it. But this is literally the most obscene, disturbing book that I've read in a long time. Worse than Tender is the Flesh, I would say, just because of the circumstances are very different. And so just a warning to anyone who wants to read this, it is really messed up, really, really fucked up. And so please read the trigger warnings on this or just don't read this if you get triggered by things. Please just don't read this, because it's not for you. It is too much. So, but I'm really glad I finally got into it. I devoured this in one day. I mean, it's really short. It's under 200 pages, and it's compact, but I wanted to know what happened, and wow. Yeah. So gave this one 5 stars. Starting out great in January. One last thing, I will say the buildup of suspense in the first part of this book was just mwah, so good, and it really made me want to keep going, and it paid off, but in like an awful way, obviously. But yeah, he did a really good job. I don't know if I'll read any of his other works though. I looked up some of them. I might, but we'll see. We'll see. The next book I finished was Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. This one I had in Kindle Unlimited. I don't have a physical copy. I do have one coming pre-ordered from a Kickstarter that I joined, and it'll be a pretty special edition, but I have no idea when that will show up. But yeah, this one was not at all what I was expecting. I thought it was going to be a lot of like plot, a lot of action, and there is, but it's definitely more of a character-focused book. And the character work was so well done. I just wanted to keep going and keep reading, but like, yeah, like I said, it's not what I expected, but in a good way still, not in a bad way. So I kind of tell people that now that want to read it. It is not what everyone thinks. It's like not like this really like action-packed, you know, fighting book, you know, that you would think of with more of an Asian-inspired fantasy. It is definitely more Japanese-leaning in terms of its inspiration. There's some Korean in there and like a few other cultures as well. But we follow a family, mainly the mom and the son. And the mom used to be a fighter. She went to the academy. She's kind of more worldly. And then she married into this family that is very traditional. The man is the ruler in the house. It's very patriarchal. And so she wasn't ever allowed to use her skills. And then we meet her son, who is in the academy learning to become this great master like his father is as well. And so it's a kind of Avatar: The Last Airbender inspired magic system. There's like water benders, airbenders, firebenders. I'm sure there's earthbenders somewhere in the book, but we follow him learning to be a waterbender. It's very much a different name in the book, but for ease of understanding, I'm going to say waterbender. And so their whole family are waterbenders, and their whole family is known to be like great protectors of the Sword of Kaigen. The Sword of Kaigen is the like little peninsula island they're situated in, and they are known as like these ancient protectors that have saved this country many times before, and so it's a lot to live up to. And so where things start changing is they start to hear things of potential invaders. Things obviously ramp up, and you know, a lot of stuff happens. So I'm gonna leave it at that. I don't want to spoil anything because I went into it basically knowing nothing. And so I thought the way she did the waterbending was really interesting. Like the emotions she brought to the character, the dynamic between Misaki, who is the mom, and her husband, as well as her son. She has like 4 other sons as well. And so just a very interesting family dynamic that she does. And it was frustrating at points, but she did a really great job as to like making sure we understood who these people are and why they acted the way they did. And so I applaud her for that. I also ended up giving this one 5 stars because it deserves it. Though I will say it is not probably for everyone, honestly. It is definitely more of a character development type book with some action, but less plot driven. And I will say it is pretty complicated to understand. She has a whole glossary in the back to reference words that are used, but if you're not at all aware of like Japanese or Asian culture, like in terms of language and how they speak to people and like honorifics, it gets really confusing in the beginning. Like even I, who has some knowledge of that, had to refer to the glossary a lot to understand the hierarchy of things. So just keep that in mind. It is a bit of work to understand in the beginning, but you get the hang of it after a while. Kind of, I would say, like along the lines of if you've read Babel by R.F. Kuang, similar, but a new language and stuff. So keep that in mind, but I think the work is worth it, and I think she did an amazing job. So yes, 5 stars for this one. The next book I read is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. This is my first sci-fi in a long time, but the cover intrigued me, and I've heard really great things about this book, so I wanted to give it a try, and it's short, so I thought I might as well do it. And so I had no idea what to expect going into this either. It's a very vague synopsis. It's about a place called Area X that has been uninhabited for a very long time, and they've sent many expeditions over the years to explore it, figure out what's going on over there, and all of them have ended up a bit weird. So we follow a group of 4 women that are sent to Area X this time. It is a biologist, a psychologist, a surveyor, and an anthropologist. Our narrator is the biologist. We never really get names in this book, but this book is weird. I was expecting weird, but I wasn't expecting like my kind of weird. It is, yeah, it's a vibe. Like you feel, like you get a feeling while you're reading it. It very much felt like the same way I felt when reading I Who Have Never Known Men. So if you've read that and you really loved it, this might be a great sci-fi version of that. I thought it very much made me feel that way, because there's a lot of questions in this book, and you don't always necessarily get answers. It's a trilogy, so, or I think there's 4 books out now, so we'll see how many there actually end up being, but this is the first book, so I'm sure we'll find out more later. But I had a great time, and it's slow. It is not a fast-paced book. It's slow, but it's so mysterious and weird, and I loved every second of it. I read this pretty quickly as well, and so I definitely am ready to go to the second book soon. And yeah, I read this in 2 days, but probably less than 24 hours because I was just so intrigued by it. But don't look up anything else. I feel like it's better to go in not knowing anything, which is why the synopsis is so vague, and for good reason. So highly recommend this one. I also gave this one 5 stars. You can see where we're going with this. As I alluded to in the intro, it is starting to get dark now. There's lots of like pondering and the unknown of it all that I really enjoyed, that was similar to I Who Have Never Known Men. I have no idea where the plot is going with the rest of the series, but and I don't usually love like existentialism, like the poeticness of life, but the end of this made me feel super peaceful, but also very confused. So yeah, very, very much recommend this book if you like weird books, because I feel like this gets a bad rap for people that are used to like general sci-fi, and this is not your typical sci-fi. The next book I read is Galapagos by Kurt Vonnegut, and this was everything I wanted it to be and more. This was another very weird book. I mean, Kurt Vonnegut is like the king of weird fiction. He's just, everything he writes is so interesting and unique. And there's always kind of like a weird thing as to what he's writing. Like the narrator of this is a very interesting character, which you wouldn't expect it to be. I'm not going to tell you what it's like because you should read it for yourself. But this story was just so bizarre and so out there and so absurd, and I loved every second of it. And I feel like this would be a like super funny, weird movie to watch also. I just love how he structures his stories. They're very unchronological, kind of trail of thought. Like you just kind of go with what the narrator wants. But this book is technically written a million years from 1985, recounting what happened that year. And it's about a group of individuals that are set to go on a cruise, the nature cruise of the century, to the Galapagos Islands. It was supposed to be celebrity packed, and very, very famous people were going to be on this cruise, but then basically kind of World War III breaks out, or like there's a huge economic crisis resulting in a World War III, and then the remaining people end up shipwrecked on one of the islands in the Galapagos and basically start civilization from scratch from themselves. And so they create a very new generation and race. It's just so fun and so crazy. and very much right up my alley. This is by far my favorite Kurt Vonnegut book I've read so far. And I don't know if things will top it, but we'll see. There's a lot to get through, but this one was definitely 5 stars. The second to last book I read in January was The Glutton by A.K. Blakemore. I have been wanting to read this one for a long time, so I finally did, and boy, is her writing even better in this one. What got me with The Manning Tree Witches was her writing. Like, the story wasn't like that intriguing and interesting, but the way she wrote was amazing, and it's so much better in this. Like, this is her second novel, and the plot and the characters in this are way more interesting, which makes it so much better. But basically we're learning about the life of the great Terrar, who is a real person in history that was known for eating anything and everything. And so this is him on his deathbed in a hospital, and a nun is listening to him recount his life, and what an awful and sad life it was. This book is very depressing, but also very witty and kind of funny in the way she writes. And so this poor man had one of the worst lives I've ever read about. And I'm not gonna spoil anything, but if you really like historical fiction and very, very dark life stories and things that happen, he has just an insatiable appetite constantly and is used and forced to do things, and it is just so sad, but like so well done. Because you kind of like start out hating this guy, but then as you learn more about his past, you like understand him a lot better. So yeah, very, very, very well done. So this one was also a 5 star. And as you can see, I was so close to full 5 stars, except for if it wasn't for this poor book, which I thought would be 5 stars. I was for sure this was going to be 5 stars because I had read this author before, but this is The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I have read Marina before and I loved it. It was in one of my greatest of all time books of last year. Even though it probably does deserve 5 stars. I gave it 4.5. I don't even remember why, but I probably should give it 5 stars because it is now one of my favorite books. But I was expecting a lot from this, I guess, because I loved that one so much. And honestly, the first few chapters, I was like, oh my god, this is great. I love the writing. Like, this is right up my alley. But just the more I read, and I did this via audiobook mainly, like I did Marina fully via audiobook, but this one just didn't do it for me. I just don't understand why people love it, honestly. It got extremely boring to me. I don't understand why we're supposed to care about anything that happens. I don't like the way he wrote women in this one, and it moves extremely slow, and it's very long for kind of no good reason. I made it halfway through, so I didn't like DNF it quickly, and I'm still willing to get convinced to read it because there is like towards the end, the page or the chapters count starts over again. So I'm very curious like what that is and what the twist is, if there is any. But I had to compare it to Marina because the structure of the story is exactly the same. It's about learning about this mystery through meeting people that were involved or new people. And so you kind of learn through stories more about this mystery. But the mystery in this book, it's just, I don't get why I needed to care. We're following a boy named Daniel whose father owns a bookstore, and there's this mysterious cemetery of forgotten books that has very special access to, and he finds this book by Julian Carax in there, and he's never heard of this person before, but he was enthralled by this book, and he meets some other people that love this book, but no one really knows what happened to the author or what's going on, so they're trying to figure out what happened, and apparently they find out that someone's trying to get rid of all Julian Carax's works, and so there's this weird, creepy figure also that we meet, who I assume is the villain, and it just wasn't intriguing enough for me. Like, I didn't know why I had to care about Julian. Like, the things I was learning wasn't that interesting. Like, In Marina, like everything was more like suspenseful. It was like, oh, this is actually an interesting thing that I want to find out. Like, I don't know why we have to care so much about this author because his life, even like the things we're learning about his life, wasn't even that interesting. Or what he was writing about wasn't even that interesting, and the characters that we meet weren't even that interesting. So yeah, I just like, I didn't really get it. I don't really understand why people find this so good, and like the writing is like kind of overly descriptive in a way. Like there's too many words, I feel like, being used to explain things, which I didn't feel in Marina. So that's interesting. I wonder if that one was before or after this one. I feel like it was after. Nothing that we learned, no people that we met propelled me to want to learn more about Julian Carax and his books. And so I didn't really care enough to continue the story of Daniel trying to figure that out. So I ended up DNFing it. And I was audiobooking this at night, and I would literally fall asleep. And usually I don't like to fall asleep, or I try to stop myself from falling asleep, but I would literally just like let myself fall asleep while listening to the audiobook because it was just meh. So if it really does pick up and like the twist is worth all of it, like please let me know and I'll consider continuing it. But if not, I'll just look up what the twist is because if I really want to know. And yeah, and I'm kind of sad because this is a whole series, but I don't know, it was really boring. And so I'm very curious to see what people enjoyed about it. I'm looking at you, Ellen. But I understand why you would recommend this to me. I was very excited for it myself. Like the premise of it sounded very interesting, and maybe I just needed more at that time. Maybe it wasn't the right time for me to read something that is like slower and less like action-packed, even though like I don't expect this to be action-packed. But yeah, convinced me to continue. And if not, it's okay. But this book I DNF'd it halfway through. And to be honest, probably will be a hard DNF, but maybe one of you can convince me otherwise. And so as you can see, I was so close to a 5-star January, and I still consider it technically a 5-star January because I got 5 books that were 5 stars and only 1 book that I didn't even finish. So does that even count at all as a book I read? So yes, very, very good start to the new year in contrast to what's been going on. It was nice to escape through these books that I really enjoyed. And so yes, very excited to continue on in February. I have a good stack. Let me know if you've read any of these and what your thoughts are. If you have any recommendations for me based on my 5-star reads this month, let me know. I'd love to check them out. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day. Bye.